Hi. So I'm going to make it short. I know everybody's kind of tired and not enough food. There is an urban legend that the Asianadian was founded in Mars Food way back in April Fool's Day in 1978, a Toronto diner. And I can vouch for that because I was there having breakfast and bacon and eggs and hash brown with the other two co-founders, Tony Chan and Lao Bo, also known as Paul Levine. That's during the breakfast we decided that we would launch the new Asianadian magazine. Perhaps not surprisingly, the diner is still around if you go to College Street in Toronto. This is 40 years ago, and however, the Asianadian is no longer around. The story of how we founded it is back in 1978, I was volunteering for a Chinese-Canadian magazine called the Crossroads. It's a magazine that supports cultural production from Chinese-Canadian point of view, works by Chinese-Canadian poets, artists, filmmakers, and writers, probably laced with a deep sense of social political perspective and often left-wing. But it was also a magazine aimed at newly arrived immigrants from Hong Kong, imparting them to belong and to encourage them to join in, to take part in the great Canadian cultural mosaic. It's been publishing in Chinese for about a year when they decided that they would want to add an English section, English half to it. And that's when I brought Tony Chan in to be the English editor. So the articles are typed and cut and pasted on layout boards. And I was going to spend the next 2 hours talking about how we did that with before the word processing and internet and personal computer, but I won't. I see there's a typewriter out there. I was going to show you the typewriter we used. It's called a typewriter, Typerwrit. It's IBM's electric. It's very advanced. It's got electricity in it. You can plug it in. So it was when these English pages were laid out, and this is how it's been laid out, that Tony and I realized that it doesn't make sense to do a bilingual magazine. Half the people who read the English would not be able to read the Chinese and vice versa. So at the diner that morning, we decided that we're going to break out from the Crossroads and go at it on our own. The new magazine would be Pan-Asian, encompassing not only the voices of Chinese and Japanese Canadians, but also those of the South Asian, Korean, Vietnamese, and Filipino backgrounds. And here's the three of us doing the founding. I don't know what I was doing, or Paul Levine was doing with his cigarettes, because we don't smoke. But I think we want to act cool like Tony did. So, so what we did was we decided to salvage what we had and put a new cover on and put a name for the magazine. It was the name Crossroad has 10 letters. So Tony and I were looking for a 10-letter word that we can cut and paste and stick it on top of the Crossroads. That's when Tony came up with the word Asianadian, Asian and Canadian. So it was a call of arms of sorts, stating out, and Tony wrote the first editorial. It was a call to arms because our mandate was to stand up against the distortion of our history in Canada, stereotypes, economic exploitation, and the general tendency towards injustice and inequality practiced on the so-called visible minorities. It was the candor and passion of Tony Chan that set the tone for the next 6 years. And these were some of the early collective members that work on the magazine. I know Jin Chong had worked on the later years. In fact, I never met Jin because I left, and both the founders left after about 2 or 3 years. So the Asianadian was published quarterly in Toronto, and from 1978 to 1985, during the time of significant anti-racism activism in Canada. It was also a time marked by an ongoing debates on multiculturalism and controversial media representation of the people of color, and of course, a nascent Asian Canadian writing. So we were the first Asian Canadian magazine to focus on anti-racism, anti-sexism, and anti-homophobia, while also maintaining a cultural aspect with poetry, fiction, crossword puzzles, book reviews, and movie reviews. So in a sense, we were ahead of our time, and it actually catapulted the Asian Canadian cultural production into, so this is a poetry page from one of the issues. We were showcasing the early works of Terry Watada, Kerry Sakamoto, M.G. Vasanji, and the poetry of Sairo Dabadine, Hinami Banaji, and Roy Miki. There was also a short story by Rick Xiaomi, who wrote about an Asian private eye called Sam Shikase, after Sam Spade, investigating the mysterious disappearance of the cherry blossom queen from J-Town in Vancouver. And the story was developed into a play called The Yellow Fever. Some of you might have heard about that. The play was it opened in Toronto, and I think it played in Vancouver, but also, most importantly, played off-Broadway in New York in 1982. And then we have the Vancouver issue, edited by Sean Gunn and Paul Yee, with an editorial that traces the roots of Asian Canadian consciousness and cultural activism in the mid-70s. It featured writers like Sky Lee, Barry Wong, comics by Stephen Wong, photos by Jim Wong Chu, and poetry by the Vancouver Poetry Workshop. Later in another issue, we would feature Sean Gunn's now legendary Lo Fan Tang under what we at that time called the Heritage Reruns. Our face-to-face interview had inspiring conversation, including the one we had with Chinese-American director Wayne Wang, who we interviewed after the release of his seminal film, Chan is Missing. Of course, he went on to direct Joy Luck Club. We also interviewed Joy Kagawa a year before she published Obasang. So we were kind of trailblazing. We took a grassroots approach to what we're doing, and sort of do some take an activist stance on many of the issues that affect Asian Canadians, including immigration, mental health, political participation, women, children. This is a feature, came from a feature on children, Muslims in Canada, as well as international politics from Marcos, Philippines to Hong Kong handover. This is 15 years before Hong Kong handover. Meanwhile, here in Canada, our political movement focused on the anti-W5 movement, a national Chinese-Canadian protest against the racist portrayal of Chinese-Canadian university students in CTV's W5 news magazine called Campus Giveaway. We did not forget about Quebec. we had a Quebec issue edited out of Montreal that spoke to the political and cultural effects of the 1977 Quebec referendum on Asians in Quebec. There were film reviews and in fact, the racist depictions of the Vietnamese in the film by Michael Cimino, The Deer Hunter, triggered a 4-page analysis called The Deer Hunter, The Great American Lie. So you can see that we were heavily involved in the social political issue at that time. On the firing line, it was a kind of tongue-in-cheek commentary page with such title as, ready for this? How to make a buck in Canadian ethnic industry and not be called racist or Uncle Tom. And another one we had, cherry blossoms, lotus blossoms, Asian women for sale. It's not, doesn't, I mean, it's not, it's better than that in the title, but it was a catchy title nevertheless. And perhaps the most famous of our, and popular of our regular features is our Dubious Award, or better known as the Inscrutable Occidental Award. As a media watchdog, we handed this award to mainstream periodicals and broadcast media for, quote, outstanding achievement in stereotype journalism. Our first award went to the Canadian magazine for an article called Understanding the Inscrutable Oriental. And when CFRB radio host Gordon Sinclair mused one day in his program about the suitability of Vietnamese refugees in the harsh Canadian climate, we replied, Gordon, if the Vietnamese survive napalms and monsoons and South China Sea pirates, they'll be just fine this winter in Saskatoon. So the Globe and Mail columnist Dick Beddoes took up the Dubious Award in one of his columns, and this line then became the quote of the day in the front page of the Globe and Mail. Calgary Herald ran a cartoon with the bucktooth bellhops carrying the luggage of Jimmy Carter and his entourage. And you see Joe Clark in the back trying to check in with his luggage of his briefcase. Because there was something about Joe Clark going to Tokyo and lost all his luggage, and he was being blamed for mismanagement. So the joke is on Joe Clark, but the stereotypes is on us because of the bellhops. So let me quote from our commentary about every time we do a citation we tell them the reasons why we give them the Dubious Award. So this is a commentary that goes with this Joe Clark cartoon. We would like to state that ideally there should be no need for a Dubious Award in our magazine. Ideally, in a world free from racial and sexual exploitation, we would not be having to explore and expose what is wrong with our society. But as long as cartoons like these continue to appear in Canadian magazines and publications, we shall be forced to speak out against them. Racism in Canada is pervasive and insidious. We cannot simply ignore its presence and hope that it will disappear by itself. I think what we said before was still true 40 years later on. Perhaps our most influential issue is Volume 2, Number 1, in spring of 1979, Sexuality. With a groundbreaking article by Gerald Chan called Out of the Shadows, who wrote about what it means to be Chinese and gay. And one of our collective member, Richard Fong, has this to say about his article. It was Gerald Chan's article in the Asianadian that made me reach out to him, and I ultimately co-founded Gay Asians Toronto in 1980, the first group for racialized queers in Canada. Seeing that a mainstream non-gay Asian magazine would take up this issue also enticed me to join the Asianadian. The magazine was extremely important to my intellectual and political development and to my finding a community and a place in Toronto. That Pan-Asian project spoke specifically to my formation in the Caribbean. More than 30 years after our demise, and a generation later, the Asianadian remains one of the most, had a lot of resonance in the Asian LGBTQ community. Here's what Aris Cheuk wrote. The Asianadian has consistently provided a channel for the Asian LGBTQ community to make their voices heard. Our first exhibit in 2017 included a number of references and archival articles from the Asianadian, which feature Asian LGBTQ writers, artists, filmmakers, activists, and other cultural workers who have been pioneers in the early modern Asian LGBTQ movement in Canada. The credit to all this, of course, belongs to the hardworking and dedicated collective members over the 6-year lifespan of the magazine. As the first group, including the 3 founders, move on in their life, the next wave came on. And later years, there's a whole contingent of South Asian collective members who became very prominent in the last 2 or 3 years of the magazine's life. And through it all, Momoye Sungiman became a linchpin of the collective, and she would be the bridge from one wave to the other. And no matter where the magazine was edited, Toronto was the production center. The edited manuscript would be sent to Toronto and get processed and typed and printed. We used to rush to the Canada Post Depot in the middle of the night to deliver our freshly printed magazine to the post office so that they can be sent out across the country. We went to Chinatown bookstores and Japanese grocery stores and begged them to put our magazines on the rack. In fact, in Vancouver, Wally Lee's communist Chinese bookstore carried our magazine. And it was one of our collective member, Dora Nip, who first bought a copy from this bookstore. And that caused her to join Asianadian. And we also have existed on a very shoestring budget. In fact, I just looking over my file last week, preparing for the speech, and I found an uncashed check of $13.88 from the Canadian Periodical Publishers Association. That's how much we were getting every month, I guess, for the publication. So our story ended in the summer of '85 with our last issue, Volume 6, Number 4, Youth Issue, Part 2, edited by Jack Sito, with participation by Satish Dar, Christine Pinto, Ranveer Jangi, Dora Nip, Terry Chan, Andy Tong, and Terry Photo. But the legendary, our legacy continues, and I'm pleased to say I've since met many people who, when they found out who I was, told me that the magazine changed their lives. We have been cited and written about in the academia, most prominently in Xiaoping Li's book, Forces Rising, Asian Canadian Cultural Activism. 2 years ago, Alice Jim of Concordia University published her article, Asiancy and Visual Culture, the Asianadian magazine, 1978 to 1984, in the Journal of Canadian Art History. Next month, Angie Wong of York University is going to defend her PhD thesis in philosophy. Her title, the thesis is called The Asianadian 1978-1985, Hybridity and Resistance in Theory, in Practice. She cited a lot of Jean-Paul Sartre, Michel Foucault, and all that stuff, and I have no idea what she's talking about. Perhaps the most intriguing thing are the street posters we found last year. This is 30 years after our demise, and there are about 4 or 5 streets in Chinatown that had these posters on. This is an Asianadian poster done by somebody. You notice the grassroots activism in the top right corner. All the issues that we cover is in the crossword puzzle. And the descriptor in the bottom right and our logo is something that we would have written ourselves. So 30 years after we ended, who would have even know about this magazine, and much less get everything right in one poster? It took us a year to find out who they were, where they were. There were 2 design students from the nearby Ontario College of Art and Design. They had stumbled across our magazine going through the Toronto Reference Library, and they were looking for Asian Canadian issues. They were looking for social justice issue. And they found us. And they did a street poster campaign, kind of like a Bansky thing, you know, kind of putting on a poster. And in fact, these posters are still around today. 1 year after, nobody tore it down. 1 year after they would put up there. And this is done with a shade of resistance and defiance. So it's exactly what we used to do. So to put this into perspective, it all started here in Vancouver. Tony and I have been very aware of what was going on in Vancouver in the mid-70s. The Gamsanbo, the Pentagai radio station, the Powell Street Review. And I don't even remember how I met Jim Wong Chu, but I distinctly remember reading Sean Gunn's Lu Fan Town. And I was really bowled over by the kind of satire that Sean has been able to put in writing. So that has guided us ever since. And we even named our collective the Asianadian Resource Workshop after Jim Wong Chu's Chinese Canadian Writers Workshop. So in that sense, we definitely borrowed the word workshop from Jim. So here's a big thank you to all of you in Vancouver for lighting the spark in us. And we pick up your torch and we never look back again. Thank you.